Today, we're going to start a couple of messages that go together. So this is part one. We're talking the next couple of times about love for Jesus versus a betrayal of Jesus. Love for Jesus versus a betrayal of Jesus. And next week, actually, I will be preaching at First Baptist in Newport. So we have part one this week, and then we'll take a break from this. Eric will be speaking next week, and then I will give part two the week after. Very important question that is asked in the scripture from Jesus is, do you love me? This is something Jesus asked Peter after Jesus' death and resurrection. You remember that Peter had actually denied Jesus 3 times. But after Jesus died and rose again, he made appearances to the disciples. And at one time, he actually ate breakfast with them. And it says, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And Peter said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." What an incredible interaction that is as Jesus asked this question, do you love me? And as we're looking today at Mark chapter 14, this question really applies for all of us. The question that Jesus asks, do you love him? Do you love him? We could say there really are two kinds of people in the world that we live in. Those who love Christ and those who reject him. And Mark is going to give us examples here of each. He's going to give us an example of each. There is a contrast. And in preface to the contrast, we have here at the beginning of Mark 14 a few verses that talk about this preface, or this contrast, the preface to it. It says, it was now 2 days before the Passover. And so this is now going to be Wednesday of Holy Week, before Jesus is crucified. 2 days before Passover by the Jewish reckoning, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the chief priests and scribes were seeking how to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him, for they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people." So the backdrop of what we're going to be looking at is that there's a plot against Jesus, and we're getting now into the part of the book of Mark where we get really to everything that the whole book has been heading towards. Because we have been looking at Mark now for 13 chapters, and we're now getting really to this final act where Jesus is facing his impending death. And the leaders are initiating this. They want him arrested. But what does it say there? They want to take him by stealth. They want to kill him. However, they do not want to do this during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or during the Passover. And the reason is because it says there might be an uproar from the people. So they're concerned about the sentiment of the crowd. We need to understand here that at this time of year, there were a lot of people coming in. I've been in New York City various times, and New York City is a busy place. But if you go there during the holiday, during Christmas, it's on a whole other level. You're walking with crowds, hardly able to move. I would imagine that's a lot like what it is in Jesus' day, because I actually read about estimates they've done. I think there were well over 200,000 sacrifices that were done during this time period. in Jerusalem during the Passover. And so based on that, they've estimated that there could be 3 million people coming through Jerusalem in pilgrimage during the Passover. 3 million people. Now that's a lot by today's standards, right? With the big cities we have, 3 million people is a pretty large crowd. Imagine in Jerusalem during that time. So what did the Romans do when there would be this many people? They knew, remember that not only were there a lot of people, but that these were Jewish people who were very passionate about their country. So the Romans made sure there was a lot of security. There was a lot of armed presence during that time period. And so in this context, the leaders are saying, we want to kill Jesus, but if we do it openly, it could cause a riot, it could cause an uprising, and we could be in big trouble. So we need to do it in a time and in a way that is going to go unnoticed. Now, that's the backdrop, and then Mark is going to do something that is very interesting, which it doesn't really say it in the text. What we read in verse 3 is that while Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, what Mark is doing here is he's actually giving a flashback. And so I could imagine if this were on television, you know how they'll do like that wavy kind of effect, and they'll show a flashback. So after Mark has just said that Jesus is going to be killed, now we get that wavy pattern, so to speak, and we're doing a flashback scene of the Saturday before. How do we know that? Well, in John chapter 12, it says 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus raised from the dead. And he is going to give an account of this very scenario that Mark does. So this is the Saturday before Mark is doing a flashback to. Why is Mark doing that? Because he's piecing things together to give us really a contrast here of someone who loves Jesus versus the betrayal of Jesus. So we have here the story of a woman who honors Christ. A woman who honors Christ. And first is her example of true love for Christ. And the first thing we see in her example is that it was sacrificial. While Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, now this is interesting because we actually see that, according to John, Mary is there along with her sister Martha. Mary's the sister of Martha. Many of you know this of this family in the Bible. Their brother is Lazarus, whom Jesus raised from the dead. But it says here in Mark they're at the house of Simon the leper. So it could be that they're visiting a friend's house. And it could also be that it's also possible that Simon is the father of Mary and Martha. What we do know, though, is that they're at Simon's house and Mary and Martha are there. And Simon, it says, was a leper. The other thing that commentators have noticed about this is that if he was currently a leper, they wouldn't be at his house because lepers had to be separated from society. And so this is very likely someone Jesus had healed. He who had been known as this leprous person, Jesus healed him, and now he's at Simon's house, and he's eating. He's reclining at the table. And a woman, now Mark doesn't actually give her name, because that's not Mark's focus here. Mark just says, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. The first example of love for Christ here is that it is sacrificial. It's sacrificial. This ointment that she had is called pure nard. It's an extract of a plant from northern India in the Himalayan region. And the fact that it's pure is telling us that it's very potent. It's not mixed with anything. A few drops would suffice to create the fragrance that you want. But what is she doing? She is using all of it. Now, I had the experience a couple years ago, I still remember this, I had some cologne with me. And again, very similar to what she has. It's very pungent, right? And so all you need is a little bit. Unfortunately, when I was at a hotel room, inside of the bathroom at the mirror there, I was trying to use the cologne, and I dropped the bottle. It broke. And let me tell you, as we read in the scripture in John, it says that the fragrance filled the house. The fragrance filled the hotel room. I had to open the sliding door, do everything I could, and let me tell you, that scent did not go away all night. So when we read these words, it's easy for us to kind of skim over them. But imagine the scene here, that she takes this ointment and she uses all of it. She uses all of it. It is a strong smell. It also says that in order to do that, she broke the flask. Now, this would have been a very precious item. The kind of flask, alabaster, would have used marble from Egypt. So these were something that were very expensive items. Now again, in our culture, we're kind of used to that. But we're talking here about a woman who would not likely have had something like this on her own, with her own resources. So how did she get something so expensive? It's very probable that for her, a woman having something like this, it would have been like a family heirloom. Something passed down to her to receive this. And what does she do with this incredibly expensive item that a woman like her would never be able to get her hands on with her own monetary resources? What does she do? She breaks the flask and uses all the fragrance. That's sacrificial. It's also, number 2, reverential, because she pours it on his head. She anoints his head with the fragrance. That's an act of honor that she is giving to Jesus. And I find it very important, very interesting that you can tell in this account who really honors Jesus by their activity. Because Mary is the one, this woman is the one who is showing by her actions her love and honor for Jesus. Who you honor is shown by the way that you treat them. You can tell whom we honor by the way that we treat people. And I have to say that this woman clearly had a great, incredible reverence for Jesus. And it's interesting, too, that she likely is doing this because she knows what's going to happen. Jesus had been talking about his death. Now, you notice that from what we can tell here, she got what Jesus was saying while the disciples didn't. She was actually listening to him and taking what he said to heart and demonstrated it by her actions. You can tell the honor that someone has for Jesus by the way they act. We see that in her life. So she has love for Jesus that's sacrificial, love that's reverential, and also her example shows us a love that is loyal, because she is doing this even though she's facing criticism for it. And it's understandable from a human standpoint why she would face criticism, but she's willing to face criticism in order to show her love for Jesus. She is loyal in the face of criticism. Because what happens when she does this? It says there were some who said to themselves indignantly, Why was the ointment wasted like that? Now, isn't that interesting? She's showing reverence for Christ, and they think it's a waste. They say this ointment could have been sold for what? For 300 denarii. Now, I don't think many of you use denarii. You don't probably have a denarius on you. So this can get lost in translation. 300 denarii. How much is that? Well, it's hard to put exactly in our terms, but think of it this way. It says it's worth over 300 denarii. Over 300 denarii. And a denarii would have been a day's wage for a laborer. What's that really saying? A year's worth of work. Imagine giving up a year's worth of work in money. And they're looking at that saying, you've used a year's worth of work that could have been sold and given to the poor. And they scolded her. How do you think you would feel in a situation like that? It'd be very easy to feel shamed, wouldn't it? Because you've done this act, but people are saying, look at what you could have done with it. You know what, though? This is a very relatable experience. Because when we have great love for Jesus, it's very often that we face criticism for that love for Jesus. Just like this woman. As a matter of fact, Peter says, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they do what? They speak against you as evildoers. You notice here he's assuming that those who love Jesus will have people who will actually call them an evildoer. This woman is being told, you could have done better. You could have taken that money, you could have sold that fragrance and used that money to give to the poor. One commentator says, the world has never had a problem with religion in moderation. It has no problem with too much wealth or power or sex or influence, but it has a problem with too much religion. You can indulge in all types of things in our world, but if you love Jesus and you are extravagant in your love for Jesus, that's when people react. And even among Jesus' followers, we see complaining here. But what happens? Jesus defends her. Jesus defends her. Verse 6, Jesus said, leave her alone. Leave her alone. So, hear this. Though we may be criticized by man for our love for Jesus, it's the Lord's approval that matters. We may be criticized on the outside from the external appearance. People may criticize us, but it's the Lord's approval that matters. And that's what she had. What an example of love for Christ. That's sacrificial, reverential, and loyal. Also here, as we continue reading, we see here in how Jesus responds about her, we see marks of true spirituality. Marks of true spirituality. Notice Jesus says, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. So the first mark of spirituality that is born out of true love for Christ is that it does beautiful things. That verse that I have up here, it says, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable. What's interesting is that word honorable, it's the word kalos. That's the same word that Jesus is using here when he says she did a beautiful thing. So in other words, we are to be known for people who do good works, who do beautiful actions. A lot of times when I'm trying to illustrate the idea of kalos, the idea of beautiful works, I use something that I really like because a lot of you know I like baseball. And I had a time period where I was collecting hats and had people through my YouTube channel, they were actually sending me hats of their favorite baseball teams. And I received, a lot of pretty nice hats. But the hat that really impressed me was not actually a Phillies hat, even though that's my favorite team. Phillies lost, by the way, the other day. I'm very sad about that. But it was a very tragic loss, wasn't it? But the hat that I really liked is this one. And I like it because it was from someone in Canada. And it's just such a fascinating story behind this hat. First of all, the hat itself is beautiful. I think it's beautiful. And I can tell of the design in the front that's very intricate design. This was not an inexpensive hat for someone to just send to me willingly. But they also sent it from Canada, which was an extra expense. This woman sent me a hat. This was a few years ago. And it must have been the end of 2019, actually. In the beginning of 2020, a lot of you know something happened in the world, the pandemic, right? And there was a pastor up in Canada who at first was following, what all of the directions were, but ultimately the government up in Canada was becoming so strict that they decided as a church they were going to continue to worship the Lord openly. They started meeting together, but the Canadian government told them that what they were doing is wrong and that the pastor needed to turn himself in. So he did, and he went to jail. And I reported on this on my YouTube channel. And after I reported on this pastor being in jail, I got a message from someone. And it was the woman who sent me this hat. And she said, that pastor who's in jail is my son-in-law. But because of what he did, and he ultimately was released, because of what he did, that church actually had a lot of attention brought to it, and that church really grew incredibly in size. And people saw in his attitude something good. Even though he was being defamed as an evildoer, they saw that he wasn't doing it to be rebellious. He actually turned himself in. He was doing what he thought was right, that as a church, they should continue meeting. But I say all that to say, when I look at this hat, I see all of these things that I'm talking to you about. And I see something here beautiful. When Jesus looked at that woman's actions, he said, she has done a beautiful thing. She has done a beautiful thing. Those are the kinds of works that our lives show when we have true spirituality, when we have true love for Christ. We do beautiful things. Secondly, the second mark of true spirituality is that it does what is possible. Because Jesus goes on to say in verse 7, you always have the poor with you whenever you want. You can do good for them, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. And I find that to be very important and interesting that Jesus says she did what she could. Because remember, she's facing criticism. And there's always someone who can blame us, isn't there? Satan can blame you. People around you can blame you. You can even blame yourself, right? But here's the thing we need to remember. We can't do everything. Jesus is saying she always has the opportunity. You all always have the opportunity to give the poor. What she is doing now, this is her chance to do this. She's doing what she can. So even though people will blame you and say you could have done this, you could have done that, the truth is you can't do everything. She did what she could. And that's what God is asking us to do. Not fulfill the expectations of everybody in the world, but to do what we can do. We can do the right thing and the best thing at each given time. Mary, by the way, was good at this. In Luke chapter 10, there's another story about Mary where Jesus is having dinner with them. And many of you know this account where Mary is with her sister Martha. And it says that they welcomed Jesus into their house. And Mary sat at the Lord's feet and listened to Jesus. That's what she did. When Jesus came over their house, she listened to Jesus. It says Martha was distracted with much serving and went up to Jesus and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve all alone? Tell her to help me." We have once again Mary being criticized. This time because she's sitting at the feet of Jesus when Martha is busy doing all of the work. But what does Jesus say about that? The Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." Now that's so interesting, because how would we look at it? We would say Martha was doing the necessary things. Martha was so busy. And that's how we tend to be, right? The busier we are, the better. That proves how much we're doing what really matters. Jesus says one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion. Mary is doing what? Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. So the most important thing is what Mary seems to understand, which is her relationship with Jesus. And out of that, she is doing what she can. The right thing, the best thing, at the right time, at each given time. So true spirituality does beautiful things. It does what is possible. And thirdly, it does witness to the gospel. Because Jesus says here, "She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." What she did was to anoint Jesus for his burial. Because we know that ultimately Jesus was going to die a criminal's death. And he was not honored. But what she was doing was honoring to him. And he said that wherever the gospel is proclaimed, what she has done will be remembered. So she was actually pointing to what Jesus was doing in the message of the gospel, that he was going to give his life and die for our sin and be raised again. And when that's proclaimed to the world, what she did would show how what she did was connected to the gospel. It's a reminder to us that the gospel has been proclaimed by the sacrifices of people like her and the sacrifices of many people who have gone before us. Because they declare the worth of Jesus and they anoint him with their acts of love. That's the kind of lives we should live. That when people look at us, they see this is a person who shows the worth of Jesus Christ and anoints him with their acts of love. May we follow in their footsteps. So, as we think about all of these things, who is it that loves Christ? Who is it that loves Christ? Well, there's a story in the Bible of another woman who also showed her love for Jesus in a very similar way. This was not the same woman, but this is in Luke chapter 7. And in Luke chapter 7, we read that this happened, this woman showing her love for Jesus while he was at a supper, was with a Pharisee. And the Pharisee said, if Jesus knew what kind of woman this was, he wouldn't accept what she's doing. But he says to this Pharisee, Simon, he says, this woman has actually shown honor to me. When I came into your house, you didn't have water for my feet, but she has washed my feet. When I came into your house, you didn't show honor to me in a greeting, but she has never ceased to kiss me. And here's what Jesus says about that woman. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which were many, are forgiven. Thus she loved much. But the one who is forgiven little loves little. Those who are forgiven much love much. Those who are forgiven much love much. Do you love Christ? I know there are many here that love Christ. Actually, I hope all of you here love Christ. And I see that love for Christ demonstrated in our midst. There are people who, why do they do the things that they do? Because they love Jesus. Why do they serve in church? Because they love Jesus. Why are we taking the initiative to help people have Thanksgiving meals? Because we love Jesus. So it is a wonderful thing to see the love for Jesus in our midst. But if you can't honestly say that you love Jesus, you're not sure that you could say, I love Jesus, remember this principle, that those who are forgiven much love much. I heard a golfer yesterday who has a YouTube channel, and he is also known for being a Christian. And he was on a podcast, and they were asking him, talking to him about his Christianity. And he said, well, here's how I look at things. I hear people all the time saying, you should be a good person. You should be a good person. You should be a good person. You've probably heard that too, right? You hear that said all the time today. And he's acknowledging people are saying that. You try to be a good person. Be a good person. And here's what he says as he listens to that. He says, the problem is everybody has a different definition of good. Later on in the podcast, he said, referring to the fact that God is the one who shows us what is truly good, he says, I realize I'm not actually a good person myself. I fail all the time. That's the mindset Jesus says we need to have. The only one who is truly good is God. So who needs to be forgiven much? All of us. And if you realize that, and you go to Jesus for forgiveness, recognizing that you have problems, that you have a big problem, and you talk to Jesus, confessing that to him, you can receive his forgiveness. And those who are forgiven much love much. Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And so today, if you do love Jesus, demonstrate that love for Jesus by kalos living. Beautiful works done out of love for Jesus. We don't do beautiful works out of guilt. We do beautiful works out of freedom from guilt. And there is a difference. When you're doing things because, I feel like I should, or I'm not good enough, you lose that motivation of love. But when you realize how much Jesus forgives you, you're free from guilt. And now the works look like Mary's work. They're just acts of love. I heard a man talking recently about going to church. He started going to church. He gave his life to Christ. He had, not long before, though, been known and been living a very different lifestyle. And he was actually living as a woman. Even though he is a biological man, he was living as a woman. But he recognized he wasn't living in truth to who God made him. And now he's living as a man. And here was his advice to people. He said, even when I was living as a woman, there were some people, even some pastors, who said, you should just do what you want to do, and you can just live this way. But he said something didn't seem right about that. And here was his advice. He said, go to a church where after 100 days, after a period of time in that church, you won't be the same. Go to a church where you will be different. I pray, I hope that each and every one of us, when we think about our relationship with Christ, we realize we need to be changed. That's what Jesus does. And we see an example today of a changed life, of a woman who, how did she show her change of life? By her love for Jesus. May people see that in us.